Please take your Bibles with me and turn them to the letter of Colossians. That's on page 983 if you're using one of the Pew Bibles. And would you please stand with me for this morning's reading? We'll be reading verses 9 and 10 from Colossians chapter 1. Verses 9 and 10, Colossians chapter 1. Please follow along with me as I read. And so, from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of His will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to Him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. May the Lord add His blessing this morning to the reading of His Word. You may be seated. For those keeping track of particular words this morning, the words that I think will be frequently said are worth or worthy or worthiness, but coming from the root there, worth, build, and God. Worth, build, or building, and God. To begin this morning, I'd like to read to you the beginning of an article from the New York Times. This was published April 5th, 1997. The title of the article is "In Modern Russia, a Fatal Medieval Witch Hunt." In modern Russia, a fatal medieval witch hunt. It's written by Michael Spector. He writes this: "There is really no mystery about what happened in this forgotten little village on the night of February 22nd. Sasha Lovelady and his terrified nephew, Sergei Gretsov, went on a witch hunt. Armed with hammers and knives, they entered the house of the woman who they said had cast a spell on them and started swinging. When they were done, one woman was dead, the first murder here, at least since the revolution, and 4 of her 5 children were on their way to the hospital. The 22-year-old woman whose life they were after, Tanya Tarasova, suffered several hammer blows to the head, but survived. Saying they were spooked by wild, half-human beasts and dogged by incantations that set their eyes on fire, the killers were not shy about what they had done. And with mysticism and sorcery, a pervasive fact of modern Russian life, the other residents of this village on the border with Ukraine weren't a bit surprised. We went there to kill the entire family, the 2 men said in a joint statement the next day, because Tanya had used her black magic and sent ruination upon us. So far, the only legal proceeding to arise from the attack has come from the attacker's wife, Larissa, who has sued Miss Tarasova for putting, quote, a hex on my husband and destroying him, she said. She has also requested that the police confiscate a book called Black Magic that was found in the house on the night of the attack. This would all be meaningless, said Gennady Chalkatin, the police officer who has been given the unpleasant task of trying to solve the crime. But you can't find anyone here to tell you that witchcraft wasn't involved in this killing. In fact, you can go anywhere in Russia these days, and witchcraft is a daily part of life. At times, Russia seemed governed as much by superstition as by democracy. One of Moscow's and the nation's most popular weekly television programs, The Third Eye, whose engaging host, the president of the Association of White Magicians, is a straight, factual discussion of how sorcery and witchcraft can improve one's daily life. Last week's show featured a lesson in how to protect your house with the aid of an ordinary needle and how to use a big tailor's needle to cast special spells. Major national newspapers advertise the services of clairvoyants, witches, and warlocks every day. Well-trained doctors at respected hospitals see nothing unusual in recommending that their patients take a trip to a babka, an old woman with the power to heal. Until late last year, General Georgy Rogozin was in charge of a team of Kremlin staff astrologers whose sole job was to help guide President Boris Yeltsin in making decisions. Listen to this last paragraph. We have had in this country a very long period of total absence of spiritual education, and people completely forget what religion really means, said Reverend Alexander Byolikov. From the Moscow Patriarch to the Russian Orthodox Church explaining the power of pagan beliefs for Russians, people have lost their spiritual immunity to resist evil. They have become confused, and they often have trouble knowing what is good and bad. So this was the state of Russia in 1997. What I want to make clear this morning is that that is the backdrop in front of which Paul is praying such a prayer as this. He doesn't want life like that to happen. That is darkness of the darkest pitch. But for us to think that easy Americanism, which touts as its goal power and success and recognition and accumulation of things, is any less dark, is a lie. It's just as dark. We look at that and we're aghast. We step back and we say, oh my goodness, that's happening in Russia. But we look at our culture and its drift into total godlessness, maybe of the cleanest ways, and we say, well, that's a little better. But it's not. It ends in the same place with death and destruction. And Paul is praying this prayer for the Colossae church, which very well could be prayed for our church, that these things not happen. I want to give you just a brief look at the outline of this morning's message. This is these are three areas of Paul's prayer that we weren't able to get into the last time we studied Colossians 1, 9, and 10. And so I want to give them to you. The first is spiritual development and his worthiness. The second is master building and his worthiness. And the third is increasing knowledge and his worthiness. The first that we'll be considering this morning is spiritual development and his worthiness. I want to just pull from the text a few words or phrases that I want you just to take in for a moment when we consider spiritual development. These are words, phrases from Paul's prayer in the portion that we're studying in verses 9 to 10. Be filled in all, fully pleasing, every good work, and increasing. You guys see those phrases up there? And I want to ask you some questions based on these phrases, okay? And I just want you to answer them. You can answer them out loud or you can answer them privately. Here are some questions. Let me ask. Is the Christian life, according to these phrases, a stagnant life or progressive? Does the Christian life, according to these phrases, plateau or continually ascend? In academic terms, is the Christian life satisfied with passing or does it desire total proficiency? In hands-on terms, does the Christian life, is it content with squandered portions or does it desire no waste? So I don't know what your concept is of the Christian life, but if you look at the Christian life as, okay, I have now, by the grace of God, I've trusted in Christ, and so I have arrived. I think you'd hear Paul say, you've just begun. is what Paul would say. Listen, let me give you just a couple illustrations. On a wilderness trip, I gained a friend named Matt DeBlock. He was hoping to be here this morning, but had somewhere else he needed to be. He's a local farmer, and as I was talking to him about his operation, I learned that within his farm and other farms alike, that they desire as little waste as possible, whether that's in the combine choice that they use to leave no scrap behind, or the way that they rotate their crops. And so I learned that in rotating soybean from corn, the soybean leaves behind an accumulation of nitrogen that's good for the corn when it's planted. I learned that 30 to 50 pounds an acre of nitrogen are left by soybeans that are ready then for the corn. Matt has hogs as part of his operation, and I learned that their manure is transferred into fertilizer for his crops. And so even the one thing that you'd say, surely that's waste, it's actually the definition of waste, can be used for something productive, such as fertilizer. And the point of leaving no waste is one thing. You don't want any waste. That's a waste. But it also, when you can use your waste for something helpful, beneficial, it maximizes what? Your profit in the end. Let me give you another example. Bo and I built a birdhouse for a school project, and it could just be me, but I was kind of pleased with how it turned out. And I thought about, hey, if I built a prototype and I could figure out exactly how much cedar I used so that I could buy enough cedar to just maximize how many houses we could build out of this. And if I could show the boys how to do certain things in the garage with the tools to build these, we could open up a little Etsy thing online and sell these potentially, and the boys could make a little profit off of it. But my point is that I wanted to build a prototype and have it built in such a way that it maximized the exact amount of cedar that we purchased, because cedar is really expensive. And so the point of all of this is that God is a lot like Matt, and he's a lot like me, or we're a lot like him. God produces things that he wants to get the most work out of. And those things that he created to bring the most benefit to those around are us. And so he doesn't want scrap in our lives. He doesn't want wood that's left over that could have been used for something good, so to speak. He doesn't want any part of our farm to go to actual waste. He wants it all to be productive. So whether that's your gifts, your abilities, your speech, your mind, your resources, your house, your cars, your yards, your money, your quiet times of prayer, he wants absolutely everything leveraged toward fruitfulness. That's the idea. So when you look at these words, it's not just be half filled and that the other half's expendable, do what you will with it. No, it's be filled in all things, fully pleasing, every good work, and increasing in knowledge. He wants absolutely every fiber of our lives going in the direction of benefiting everything around us. So he wants us to be like the soybeans that bring the nitrogen that blesses the crop after it. That is what it's about. So let's get to the question of why. Why? Why does God want no portion of our lives to go to waste? Why does he want it all leveraged towards the expansion of his kingdom? The expansion of his glory. Well, here's the beauty of it. God's glory is the best answer to all of humanity. Enjoying God's glory, enjoying God's kingdom is the most desirable thing to all humanity, whether they know it or not. Let me give you an example. I want you to think in your mind about a mountain. But it's not necessarily a literal mountain. It could be. Maybe you have a certain mountain out there that you really want to climb. Okay, that's possible. But this mountain, so it can be physical, but it also can be metaphorical. What is a mountain that you're desperately yearning to get to the summit of? Let me throw out some ideas. That mountain could be graduating school at whatever level you're at. That mountain could be getting to the summit of getting married, or having a child, or a grandchild, or getting that book finally written, or that song finally recorded. Getting notoriety that you so long for. Making that team, getting that job, buying that house, getting that clean bill of health. Whatever this metaphorical mountain is that we can think. I remember a friend in college saying that mountain for him was getting a CD player in his car. Now nobody wants CD players in their car. But that was a big thing. He couldn't wait for it to happen. So whatever that mountain is, whatever that summit looks like, we think that we'll get to the peak of that summit, and there will be no other summits that we can see above that summit. Does that make sense? So you think this summit towers above every other summit. But I'm going to tell you that every summit that you get to will always necessarily have another summit in the distance that's higher, that will provide a better view of glory, that will provide a greater spectacle of beauty, a better panorama, a better vista. And that summit is the summit of God. The glory of God will outshadow every lesser glory. So this is why God doesn't want any scrap of our lives to go to waste in moving someone away from His glory, because His glory is the best vantage point. It is the highest place. It is where the most beauty lies. Look at how the author of Scriptures taught. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. So these would have been the harvest times of Israel. These were feasts. God actually had them feast. He said, bring everything you want to these feasts and enjoy it to its fullest. So these are God-blessed occasions of great joy. These weren't like partying in a bad way where your parents would be upset if you were caught there. These are God-blessed feasts. These were the times where He said, eat, drink, and be merry. Enjoy my goodness and my abundance. Enjoy these times. So this, translate for us, this would be our Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's what this would be. Where bonuses may come in, where a bunch of food is on the table, and every family's there, everybody's enjoying it. We start decorating now for it. I came home from Jewel yesterday and told Becky, I don't know what it is, but seeing like all the fall flavors of food and stuff, and coffee creamer and all the different drinks at Starbucks, the apple crisp and all. Fall's my favorite season of the year. And I think it's my favorite season of the year because it's like builds into Christmas. So it's like a really special time for me. David is saying, those special times for you can't touch the joy that God's put in my heart. It's a different type of joy. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light do we see light. So we don't know what's even good until we get in God's light. That's the idea. So the reason the why of why God doesn't want any wasted lives, that He wants you filled up in service of spreading His kingdom and inviting people to His glory, is because there's no better place to invite someone. Do you believe that? Do you believe it? Or are you not sure? Because I'll tell you this, to the degree that you're not sure that God's glory is the best thing on earth, is the degree to which you'll be stand back-ish in sharing Christ with somebody. Take a look at this picture. So this is Trinity Church at Wall Street. Do you know that this church, Trinity Church, was the tallest building, not just in New York, not just in the city, but in the United States from 1846 to 1869? Consider what Jeremy Tate says. It is nearly impossible to exaggerate the cultural impact when churches were no longer the tallest buildings. You see, this is why mountains are such a big deal in the Bible. This is, I would say, why churches took on this prospect of being the tallest buildings in the city, came from mountain theology in the Bible. What is it about a mountain that God so familiarizes himself with that every time you think of him, you should be thinking of a mountain? It's all through, from Eden, through the Psalms, through Jerusalem, the highest place. Anytime you went to Jerusalem, it says they went up to Jerusalem. The temples are always high. They're always on the hills. It's a big deal throughout the Bible. We need to see it. It's why when it talks about God, I lift up my eyes to the hills. It's always high. Jesus is on the Mount Transfiguration, crucified on a hill called Golgotha. It's everywhere in the Bible. And the reason mountains are such a big deal is because it's such a fitting place to represent where God should be stationed. Where do mountains face? No, face. Not their tops. Where do they face? The answer to that is everywhere. Right? A mountain, it faces every direction. It faces everywhere around. And yet, so it invites everything to it, as it were. It faces everything. It's got its eyes everywhere around. And yet, all of it is headed to one singular point. Do you see why mountains, that's one way, mountains are such a perfect analogy for where God is stationed? Because it faces all the earth, and yet all the earth is beckoned, invited to go to one singular point. Joel and I got to go on a particular hike on the wilderness trip where we got to this mountain top that overlooked the rest of our path because we cut it a little early. And when we got there, as we're standing there looking all around, I was like, Joel, that is just a little bit higher than where we're at right now. Like, that's the actual peak. And so we're like, let's do it. So we run over there. It was like 5 feet higher, but that was it. That's what mountains are like. It gets to the high point, and the high point is always where God is. This is the idea. So when Paul says that I want all of this stuff to be filled out, it's so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. So here, the word worthy there means a complement of the same kind. So in other words, our behavior, our lifestyles should complement the worthiness of God. Right? So everything you do should be befitting of the glory of God. So to look at us is to look at the way God would receive news that the hotel got your booking wrong and you need to sleep somewhere else. What do you look like in that moment? It's 11 o'clock at night. You just pull into the hotel. Hey, we such and such. Oh, sorry, you're not here. Oh, do you have another room? No, we're booked. And you registered. You did it. You did your part. And they got it wrong. What do you do in that moment? Does it befit the glory of God in that moment? Or does your face befit Cain and his downcast face more than the glory of God. And put that on any situation, any letdown or any joy. Do our lives befit the glory of God at any given moment, in highs or lows? So, because God is worthy, it demands our all, because it's worthy of our all. His worthiness is worthy of our all. And lest you think it's wrong, just wait till you get to the top of that mountain, because you'll find that it didn't satisfy. I remember hearing a report about a Super Bowl team that had just won the Super Bowl. It had been years before they'd ever done it last. And the head coach held a board meeting for everybody there, and everybody came. And he said to his coaching, it was for the coaching staff, he said to the coaching staff, "It's not what you thought it was, is it?" And they all unanimously agreed. They'd waited, they'd worked so hard to get to this level, to achieve this goal. The day after the Super Bowl, they meet together, and he says, "It's not what you thought it was going to be, is it?" And they said, "No." They got to the summit. They got to the top, and they looked, and there was yet a higher mountain. And that's the way it will be all the time with the glory of God. And so every part of our lives should be leveraged toward that. Which brings us to our second point: master building and the worthiness of God. Consider this phrase and see if it reminds you of anything. Of all people, I would venture to say on planet Earth, you should be the people to understand this. Any pressure? That you may be filled with the knowledge of His will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. Numerous commentators look at this phrase in the Greek, and it reminds them of something in Hebrew from the Old Testament, translated into Greek in the Septuagint. But anything this reminds you of, guys? You're not going to majorly disappoint me here, but you would majorly please me if you thought it's kind of like this. All right? This is from the Old Testament. Let me narrow the field, narrow the scope. In the book of Exodus, does this remind you of anything? Okay, no takers, okay. In the book of Exodus, there are two particular people that this should remind you of, and they're not Moses and Aaron. Now this is starting to hurt. It's starting to hurt now. Oh, I heard it. The Lord said to Moses, "See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft." So what commentators see is that Paul is praying very tabernacle-like. And what was the tabernacle? It was the house of God. And what is Paul praying for the church? He's praying that God equip them, like he did Bezalel and Oholiab, to be able to work in a variety of fields that build up the house of God. See, Bezalel and Oholiab were examples, working with actual materials, but who did those materials represent? The gold, the silver, the bronze, the curtains. Who do those represent? Look at how Paul talks. "According to the grace of God given me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation." Did Paul lay an actual foundation? Did he dig deep trenches and pour cement into it? Is that what he's talking about? Did he plant big timbers in the ground as the foundation? Is that what he's talking about? And someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds on it. What's it? What's the foundation? For no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is, everybody say it, Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he'll receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he'll suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. What is Paul talking about? He's writing to a church filled with what? People. People. The work of the gold and the silver, it's working with people built on the foundation of Jesus Christ. Now, your work with people could be of the kind that survives or could be of the kind that disappears. I was regretting this morning, on our trip, we stopped early. 3 very kind gentlemen gave us a trip back to our vans. And, I'm just getting to know this guy that's the truck that I'm riding in. His name's Nathan. I'm just getting to know him. He's doing us a huge favor. And it just felt odd to share the gospel with him. But I'm regretting that this morning. In fact, I tried to look him up on Facebook to see if I could find him. Because I'll never see him again. We talked about a lot of stuff in the truck, but I didn't share the gospel. That's a wood, hay, stubble moment, unfortunately. I was real nice. He'd say, hey, what'd you think of that Ben guy that sat behind you? Oh, he's a nice guy. Wood, hay, stubble. And only the Spirit can direct these things. But friends, the idea is that Paul is looking and he's saying, I want to be a skilled master builder. I don't want any part of my life to not be used to the construction of God's house, which is made not of stones and gold and silver, but of people. How does the book of Exodus teach us this? Well, you remember that Israel received all these costly possessions from Egypt during the Exodus. And then when they're building God's house, the people give these costly things freely to the building of God's house. So the people are associated with the stuff. And so when they give that stuff, it's like them. And even on the priest's stones were their names written, inscribed on the stones, on the priest's chest. So this is the idea that the tabernacle was built of people. The priest wore all the stuff the tabernacle was made of, and the people had portions of it on them. So they are God's house, not that thing. That was just a display, a figurative display of them. So God is building a people into his house, not a structure, a people into his house. A very interesting circumstance arises in the book of Numbers. Some of you might be familiar with it. There is a part of the priestly line was a man by the name of Korah. And in Numbers 16, Korah, who is part of the priestly line, stands up and he says to Moses and Aaron, he says, why are you the special people? We're all priests. You shouldn't get privileges over us. And Moses falls face on the ground, begs them not to rise up against him and Aaron. And he says, listen, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're each going to take our bronze censer and we're going to station it out. And tomorrow we're going to fill it with fire. And whoever's fire God accepts will be shown to be God's man. And whoever's fire God does not accept will be seen to not be God's man. And he'll make it very clear tomorrow. So tomorrow comes, and the 250, along with Moses and Aaron, take their bronze censers, and they put them out. They put fire in them, and God says, okay. And by the way, it wasn't just 250 men. All of Israel lined up behind those 250 men. So this is like a Joshua and Caleb moment all over again, that all Israel is against Moses and Aaron. And God says, get ready, I'm going to wipe them all out. And Moses begs God, please don't wipe out the people behind them. I understand Korah and his company, but please spare Israel. And God says, okay, tell them to remove themselves from Korah and his company. And so he does, and Israel backs up, and fire comes down and consumes Korah and his company. But here's what's really interesting. They're all standing among their censers, and look at what God instructs Moses to do. or it's actually Eleazar's son, Eleazar, Aaron's son. As for the censors of these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the bronze altar. For they offered them before the Lord, and they became holy. Thus they shall be a sign of the people of Israel. So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers which those who were burned had offered, and they were hammered out as a covering for the altar, to be a reminder to the people of Israel, so that no outsider who is not of the descendants of Aaron should draw near to burn incense before the Lord, lest he become like Korah and his company, as the Lord said to him through Moses. And so here's the idea that, friends, people around us are precious material. And our job is to extend to these precious people, no matter the sins they're involved in, no matter the religious background or a non-religious background, no matter how good of a person we think they are or how bad of a person we think they are, we are to extend the grace of God to them. And that grace will either be turned into glory, as in they will lean into Jesus, or judgment, they'll lean away from Jesus. But in either way, it goes until the glory of God, as you see with Korah and his company. They were like the bronze that now stands as a testament to don't go their way. We don't say that pridefully. We don't say it boastfully. We say it with awe and holiness before God. So our job is to lovingly, prayerfully, humbly, patiently hold out the grace of God to everyone around us, praying for them as often as we can, so that they might see the glory of God in us, in the face of Christ. We're to be gladly becoming master builders, not squandering any opportunity for the glory of God. Charlie came in this morning and was talking to me about something a friend shared with him, and it goes like this. I hope I get it right, Charlie. You say to a person, if you had 3 days to live, who would you talk to? It's a who, what, why. 3 days to live, who, what, why. The first is, who would you talk to if you had 3 days to live? The second question is the what. What would you tell them? And the third question is a why, and that is, why are you waiting? 3 days to live, who would you talk to? What would you tell them? And why are you waiting? And friends, you might hear this and you think, okay, Ben's telling me to never go home, to stay out 24 hours a day, witnessing to anybody I possibly can. And I'd say, if God tells you to do that, do it. But then you need to look at people like David and Eli and Samuel. What do David and Eli and Samuel all have in common? Anybody know? You'd say men of God? Okay. Men of God whose children went to pot, for the most part. David, Eli, and Samuel. So listen, taking God's grace and giving it to those around you starts with your family. I'm talking about how the hotel attendant sees you when you get bad news. How do your kids see you? How does your spouse see you? You see, they're the first to see the glory of God in your face. And so, friends, be a master builder of spreading the glory of God, and it starts with those closest to you. That's the idea. And then lastly, increasing knowledge and his worthiness. Look at how Paul finishes this portion of the prayer. And increasing in the knowledge of God. And increasing of the knowledge of God. See, It's something where, I think when people watch Star Wars and they see Jedi warriors and people being trained by Jedis, and you said, hey, is that what the Christian life is like? And I think some people might say no. But I majorly disagree with you. If you're a faithful reader of the Gospels, you know that Jesus speaks of people's faith as being sufficient or inferior. Does he not? Like, you don't get the way of the Jedi yet. You're still a Padawan. You don't understand it fully. You don't understand the Force fully. Christ talks like this. Look at what he says. When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. Now, the crazy thing is this is a Gentile. It's not a Jew. He's not familiar with the ways of the Old Testament even. But he comes to Jesus, and he talks as though he were in an incredible way. And he said to him, I will come, Jesus says, I'll come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled, and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. But continually, he says to his listeners and to his disciples, where is your faith? So there is definitely an elementary faith and a graduate level faith. And how do you move, my question is how do you move from one to the next? The centurion's incredible. He did, I believe, give alms, and so he's familiar with the Jewish way, at least to some level, but not anywhere near where the Jewish people would have been. So how do you move from elementary faith to graduate level faith? The answer to that is you act in faith in a small way. That's the answer. As you act in faith in the smallest of things, guess what you'll find? Will God disappoint you in that or satisfy you? He'll satisfy you. That's why the Psalms say, taste and see. Is the word taste a gorge word, or is it a dainty word? Right? On the wilderness trip, we had this thing where instead of having a community meal, we all brought our own what's called MREs, these free-dried meals, and everybody picked out their own. So as you can imagine, as food lovers who are all really hungry, we get our MRE ready, and we take a bite, and we say, oh, and then guess what would we do? You got to try this. Take a bite. Right? So everybody's trying each other's, chicken teriyaki or beef stroganoff or whatever it was. Everybody's tasting it and comparing their food to the other. So I gotta tell this story. Jason Pick, he's sitting over here, is maybe the biggest food lover of the whole group. And we switched to, you wouldn't know it looking at him, but we changed to these MREs, much to his chagrin, because he loves Becky's community meals that she makes, or she puts together for us. So he's really upset. I said, Jason, here's the deal. Just order one and taste it and see if you like them. He calls me back a few days later. He's like, I'm not even doing that. I'm bringing my own food, and this is what we're going to do. So the first night, I take a bite of my MRE for the first time, and I'm telling you, it was like a home-cooked meal. It was that good. No, that's like bashing Becky a little bit. It wasn't like a home-cooked meal, but it was surprisingly good. And I look at Jason, and I'm like, dude, you just got to try one bite. And he's making his terrible meal that he tried to figure out. And he takes a bite, and I will never forget his face. He goes, that's pretty good. And it's over. He didn't bring any MREs. He's cooking all by himself. Anyway, so the way faith works is it's a taste and see. that if God's calling you to something, do it. No matter how big, no matter how small. Just do it. Just try it. And the Bible says that when you try it, you will find that you're so satisfied in that small little act of faith that you'll start moving from faith to faith because you will increase in the knowledge of God. That's the idea. You will increase. You'll see, oh my goodness, this turned out way better than I thought it would. I was so nervous to do this, but I did it, and the bottom didn't fall out. It was great. And so you move from faith to faith to faith. Look at how David Garland puts it. This is worthy of writing down. If you don't have time, I can give it to you later. But it says this: to receive the gospel, that is, that Jesus came to this earth, died on the cross, and rose again so that our sins could be buried and new life could come forth. To receive the gospel is to come to know God. To know God is to do His will. Now, there should be a huge line in there because people who believe they've received the gospel could stumble up at this point. They say, I know God, but then they don't do His will, and that's where Daniel read this morning. That's like the demons. The demons know theology. Pastors teach in the doctrines. The demons could teach a better class than pastor, who's been a pastor for 30 years now. They could do a way better job teaching that class than pastor. They have spot-on theology. But they're not converted. They hate it, but they could tell you it better than anybody. They don't do the Lord's will. That's the demons. So to know God is to do His will. If you say you know God and you don't do His will, you don't actually know God. That's why it's such a big deal in the churches, brothers and sisters, to say, hey guys, or hey you, me. That's not acting like you even know God when you do that, or when you look like that, or when you talk like that. That's a big deal because we want to do His will. But then Garland points out and says, to do His will is to know more and more of God. That's why John Calvin says, true knowledge of God is born of obedience. True knowledge of God is born of obedience. You can talk all about the knowledge of God, but if it has a distaste in your mouth, you've never done it. But if you do it, if you obey the knowledge of God, you act on that, it will be sweet in your mouth and you'll be the biggest evangelist ever. Going back to the wilderness trip, Joel Freeman killed it on day 2. It was like a 2,000-foot climb, just zigzagging back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on these switchbacks. And it's agonizing. You're in the sun, and worse than that, you're getting passed by people older than you that are native Nevadians, okay? So it hurts when like a 70-year-old is passing you. There's no offense, 7-year-olds, okay? But they have lungs that I don't have, so it makes me feel a little better. But anyway, you're getting just beat up. Well, Joel makes it to the summit, and he's skipping back down the mountain. And he leaves his bag at the top because he's going to ferry someone else's bag up for him that's struggling. And he skips down the mountain, and he stops, and he looks at you, and he goes, it's worth it. It's worth it. You got to get there. It's unbelievable. And then he moves past. Like, that's what it is to walk in the will of God. You are more and more satisfied. So the things of earth just get a lesser and lesser grip. Because God, the knowledge of God gets sweeter and sweeter as you obey Him. He shows you His deeper self. So, the Christian life. A continual progression in becoming a builder of people for the glory of God. This is a summary of the sermon. A continual progression in becoming a builder of people for the glory of God. So friends, this is Paul's prayer for the church. Is it being answered in your life? Every conversation, every interaction with folks in the church, outside the church, folks that know Christ, folks that don't, are you seeing yourself as a builder of people for the glory of God? That is Paul's prayer for the church. By the grace of God, may it be answered in us. Amen? Musicians, would you please come?